She brushed against me once, a soft, harmless accident. But the second time, she paused. And in that single heartbeat, I knew, this wasn't about chance anymore. It was about everything we weren't supposed to feel. The first time she brushed against me, it felt like nothing, and yet, everything. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind you forget until something unforgettable happens in the middle of it. Her son had asked me to stop by and help move a few things around the house, just simple stuff. The kind of favor you do without thinking. When I arrived, she was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, her hair tied loosely, the soft hum of an old song playing from her phone. She smiled politely when I greeted her, that kind of polite that feels almost too gentle, too steady. I remember thinking she carried herself like someone who'd seen a lot, but learned how to move through it gracefully. The room smelled of cardamom and soap. Late sunlight filtered through the window, casting gold dust on her skin as she reached for a stack of plates. I stepped aside to give her space, but she turned at the same time, and her arm brushed against mine. It was the lightest touch, fabric against fabric, but it stopped me. For half a breath, I forgot what I was supposed to do next. Her voice didn't waver when she said, "Sorry," but her eyes, calm and unreadable, flickered with something almost like awareness. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I wanted to. I smiled back, trying to play it off, but the warmth from that small contact stayed longer than it should have. A simple accident shouldn't echo like that. It shouldn't have made the air feel heavier, quieter, like something invisible had shifted between us. She went back to what she was doing, stirring a pot, asking if I wanted tea. Her tone was normal, perfectly normal. But when she passed the cup to me, her fingers came close to mine again, not touching this time, but close enough for the warmth to return. I sat by the counter, pretending to scroll through my phone while she moved around the kitchen. The more I watched her, the more I noticed things I probably shouldn't have, the calm rhythm of her movements, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the quiet confidence in her posture. There was something grounding about her presence, steady, composed, and yet it made me strangely restless. Later, as her son joined us and the noise of conversation filled the room, I found myself glancing at her without meaning to. Once, our eyes met briefly, a simple, polite look, but something about it felt heavier than words. She looked away first. I pretended I didn't notice. When I left that evening, the sun was already dipping below the trees. I should have been thinking about the day, about work, about anything else. But all I could remember was that small, accidental touch. I told myself it was nothing, a coincidence, a moment without meaning. But deep down, some quiet part of me knew that things like that don't happen without reason. As I reached my car, I glanced back through the kitchen window. She was there, wiping the counter, moving as if the day hadn't changed at all. But even from a distance, I could tell, she paused for a second, her hand still on the cloth, before she exhaled softly. And somehow, that small breath felt like an answer to a question I hadn't dared to ask yet. It had been a few days since that small, forgettable accident in the kitchen, at least that's what I kept telling myself. But when something changes the way you see a person, even the air feels different the next time you're near them. That afternoon, I found her outside in the garden. The sun was low and kind, the kind of light that softens edges and makes everything feel quieter than it is. She was pruning roses, wearing a faded blue shirt, sleeves rolled just past her elbows. A few strands of hair had escaped the loose clip holding them, moving with the breeze. She looked peaceful, not distant, just quietly focused. I said her name softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, and for a second, everything stilled. There was something in her eyes that wasn't there before. Recognition, maybe. Or a quiet question she wasn't ready to ask. "You're early," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. I shrugged. Didn't want the day to end yet. She smiled, a real one this time, small, unguarded. And just like that, the space between us shifted again. I asked if she needed help, and she nodded, handing me the pruning shears. When our fingers met around the handle, it was just for a heartbeat, but that heartbeat was loud. She didn't pull away too quickly. Neither did I. We worked side by side, barely speaking, surrounded by the soft rustle of leaves and the smell of earth after watering. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, it felt almost intentional. Like both of us were trying to listen to something that didn't need sound to be heard. She asked about my work, my week, small things, but every answer felt heavier than it should. When she laughed at something I said, her hand brushed her neck absent-mindedly, and my eyes followed without permission. I caught myself, looked away, pretending to examine a rose instead. She noticed. I could tell. Her laughter faded, replaced by that same quiet awareness from before. When she bent to pick up a fallen petal, I caught a faint whiff of her perfume again, subtle, floral, the kind that lingers in memory more than in air. For a moment, I wondered if she chose it for herself, or if someone once chose it for her. A breeze passed through, carrying a few loose petals between us. She looked up at the same time I did, and our eyes met, unplanned, unguarded. This time, neither of us looked away. It wasn't a long stare. It didn't need to be. Just a few seconds, enough to say what words couldn't. I felt it too. Then, as if realizing what hung in the air, she exhaled softly and turned back toward the roses. "They're almost done blooming," she said quietly, her voice steady but lower now, more fragile around the edges. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if we were still talking about flowers. As she gathered the trimmed stems, I took the basket from her hands, our fingers grazing once again, this time slower, lingering half a breath longer than politeness allowed. She smiled faintly, thanked me, and walked toward the house. I stayed behind for a moment, watching the light fall across the garden path where she had just been standing. When she disappeared through the doorway, I realized I hadn't actually seen her smile fully until today. And for reasons I couldn't explain, that simple truth felt more dangerous than any confession. Some things only happen once by chance. The second time, you know better, you just pretend not to. It was evening again, the kind of quiet that comes after rain. The windows were half open, carrying in the faint scent of wet soil. I was helping tidy up after dinner, plates, cutlery, small talk that filled the air like white noise. Her son had gone upstairs to take a call, leaving just the two of us in the kitchen. She moved around with that same unhurried grace, the kind that makes silence feel deliberate. I was standing by the counter, stacking plates, when she reached across me for a bowl. Her arm brushed mine again, only this time, it didn't feel accidental. Her hand lingered. Just long enough to make sure I noticed. My breath caught before I could stop it. She froze, too, her hand resting lightly against my sleeve. The space between us shrank into something fragile, suspended, a place where even the smallest sound could break it. I looked at her, waiting for her to pull away. But she didn't. For half a second, maybe two, her fingers stayed there, soft, warm, intentional. Then she exhaled, slow and shaky, and stepped back, eyes down. "Sorry," she murmured again, but this time, it sounded nothing like the first. It wasn't a reflex. It was a confession. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I could hear the distant laugh of her son upstairs, a reminder of where we were, who we were supposed to be. And yet, in that moment, all I could think about was how her touch had felt, not in a way that crossed a line, but in a way that quietly erased it. She turned to rinse something at the sink. I caught the faint tremor in her hands as the water ran over them. My chest tightened, not from guilt, but from something more dangerous, understanding. I wanted to say something, to make it lighter, easier. But every word that came to mind felt wrong. Instead, I just stood there, watching the steam curl up from the dishwater, wondering if she could feel my heartbeat echoing the same nervous rhythm as hers. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm again. "You've always been kind," she said, eyes fixed on the water. "Sometimes that makes people notice things they shouldn't." I didn't answer. Because she wasn't wrong. And because if I spoke, she'd hear everything I was trying not to admit. She wiped her hands, turned off the tap, and for a brief moment, leaned against the counter beside me, close enough that I could feel the faint heat from her shoulder. Then, with quiet resolve, she said, "We should finish cleaning before he comes back." The words were ordinary, but the tone wasn't. It was steady, rehearsed, the kind of calm people use to hold back what's breaking inside. When I nodded, she gave me a soft glance, one that said both thank you and don't make this harder. We finished the dishes in silence. But every time our hands reached for the same plate or glass, that small electric awareness returned, no longer something to ignore. When I left that night, the scent of her perfume followed me out the door. And as I walked down the path, I realized something simple and terrifying: accidents don't repeat themselves. People do. After that night, we both began to act as if nothing had happened, as if silence could undo what touch had already written between us. She spoke less, smiled politely, and moved with careful distance. I matched her rhythm, pretending I didn't feel the small gap she was trying to rebuild between us. But something about the quiet felt heavier now. There's a certain kind of distance that doesn't make things fade, it just makes you notice them more. When I visited next, it was raining. The kind of steady, whispering rain that softens the world outside and amplifies everything inside. The house smelled like tea leaves and candle wax. She was standing by the window, arms folded, watching the downpour blur the garden. The light fell across her face in fragments, gold from the lamp, gray from the sky. "You still came," she said softly, without turning. "I said I would," I replied, hanging my jacket near the door. She smiled faintly, still looking outside. "You always do." There was no accusation in her voice, no warmth either, just quiet acknowledgement. We ended up in the living room, sitting across from each other. The soft thrum of rain filled the pauses. She poured tea, careful not to let our fingers touch when she handed me the cup. I noticed it, even if she tried not to. The way her hand trembled slightly, it wasn't fear, it was restraint. "I shouldn't make you uncomfortable," I said finally, surprising even myself. She looked up. "You don't. Then why does it feel like you're trying to convince yourself you're fine?" She didn't answer. Just stared at the steam rising from her cup, as if it might give her words. After a while, the lights flickered, power dipping from the storm outside. She lit a candle, its flame small and golden between us. Shadows moved across her face, softening her expression. It felt like the kind of moment you're supposed to walk away from, but somehow can't. We talked. About small things at first, her garden, her work, her son's upcoming trip, anything to stay above the current pulling underneath. But slowly, our words drifted deeper. She said she missed the sound of rain when someone else was in the house. That silence was louder when you had no one to share it with. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I knew what loneliness sounded like too. But I didn't. I just watched her, the way she held her cup close, as if for warmth that wasn't really from the tea. At some point, the candle burned low. The rain softened. We fell into a silence that felt neither awkward nor wrong, just true. She looked up then, meeting my eyes. And this time, she didn't look away. There was no touch. No words that crossed the line. Just breath, steady, quiet, shared. In that stillness, I realized something: distance isn't always about space. Sometimes, it's about breath, the single, trembling one that separates what we want from what we allow. And that night, neither of us dared to breathe too deeply. Some nights feel like they've been waiting for weeks to happen, quiet, inevitable, and somehow heavier than their own silence. That evening was one of them. Her son had gone out with friends, leaving the house still and soft. I had stopped by to return a borrowed tool, though I think we both knew that wasn't the real reason. She opened the door, surprised for a moment, then smiled, a little hesitant, a little knowing. "Come in," she said. It's cold out. Her voice carried a warmth that reached me before her hand could. I stepped inside, shaking off the chill, and noticed how calm everything felt, the faint hum of the heater, the quiet ticking of the clock, the smell of coffee already brewing. She had always been graceful, but tonight she seemed lighter somehow, almost unguarded. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where everything between us had started. The light was dim, just the glow under the cabinet and a soft lamp from the corner. It felt safe. Or maybe it only pretended to be. She talked about small things first, the new curtains, a recipe she tried, her son's plans for the week. I listened, nodding, though half my attention stayed on her hands. She wasn't wearing her usual ring. I wondered if that meant anything, then told myself not to. Eventually, the conversation drifted. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. "About, the other night." I didn't move. Just waited. "I shouldn't have," she started, then stopped. Her breath trembled slightly, not with fear, but with honesty. "It's just been a long time since anyone made me feel seen." Her words lingered like smoke in the room, soft, dissolving slowly. "I get that," I said, my voice lower than I intended. "Sometimes being seen feels harder than being alone." She smiled faintly at that, eyes glistening just a little. "You're too young to talk like that." I almost laughed. Maybe. Or maybe I just notice what other people overlook. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time, it was fragile. A pause stretched between us, full of the things we didn't dare name. Her gaze drifted to my hands resting on the table. Slowly, uncertainly, she placed hers beside mine. Not touching, just close enough for warmth to cross that invisible inch. Her fingers trembled, just once. I could have pulled away. I didn't. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. "Maybe we don't have to know," I replied. Her lips parted slightly, to speak, or maybe to breathe. Then she smiled again, small and sad. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," I said. "But it feels real." For a moment, her hand moved, not fully touching, just brushing my knuckle with the edge of her fingertip. That small gesture felt louder than any word either of us could have said. We stayed like that, two hands, almost meeting, separated by fear and something that looked a lot like care. When she finally pulled back, she exhaled, shaky but composed. "We should probably stop." I nodded. But neither of us moved. Because some lines don't vanish when you step back, they follow you, quiet and invisible, reminding you that once you've crossed them in your heart, there's no real going back. I didn't see her for a while after that night. Not by choice, by hesitation. The kind that lingers even after you've told yourself to move on. Her son mentioned she'd been busy, caught up with family visits and errands. I nodded casually, pretending not to care. But every time I passed by their street, I'd find myself slowing down, glancing at the gate, wondering if she was home. When we finally crossed paths again, it was in the most ordinary way. I was dropping something off, a spare part, an excuse, and she answered the door. Her smile was polite, perfectly measured. No warmth, no invitation, just distance dressed as composure. "Thank you," she said, taking the box from my hands. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," I replied softly. She nodded, then stepped aside just far enough to keep the space between us. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable anymore. It was restrained, like both of us were holding back something that used to come naturally. "I hope you've been well," I managed. "I have," she said, and for the first time, her voice sounded tired. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of tired that comes from pretending not to feel. For a moment, I almost asked if she was okay. But before I could, her son called from another room, and she took a small step back, half turning toward the sound. It was a quiet dismissal, gentle, but clear. I left without saying goodbye. The days that followed were quieter. Too quiet. I tried to distract myself, but it was useless. Her absence had become a presence of its own, echoing in every silence, every pause, every place where her voice once fit. It wasn't until a week later that I saw her again, this time outside, on the porch, watching the rain. The sky was a muted gray, the kind that makes colors disappear. She didn't see me at first. She just stood there, shawl draped loosely around her shoulders, her hair damp from the mist. I called out her name softly. She turned, surprise flickering across her face, then fading into something unreadable. "You'll get soaked," I said, stepping closer. "I don't mind," she murmured. "It's quiet out here." There was an ache in her tone, hidden beneath calm words. I hesitated before joining her. The rain came down in thin threads, soft against the porch roof. For a long moment, we just stood there, close, but not touching. Finally, she said, "It's better this way." The words hit gently, but they stayed sharp. I nodded, because I didn't trust myself to speak. "Maybe." A gust of wind sent a spray of rain toward her, and without thinking, I stepped closer, shielding her with my arm. She froze, eyes lifting to mine. For that brief second, I saw everything she was trying to hide, longing, regret, and the smallest trace of fear. "You'll catch a cold," I said quietly. She smiled then, faint and trembling. "You always worry." "I can't help it," I whispered. The rain softened, but neither of us moved. I reached to adjust her shawl, my fingers brushing her neck, just barely. Her breath hitched, but she didn't step away. When I did, she exhaled, slow and deep, like someone letting go of something that wasn't ready to leave. The storm faded, but the ache didn't. That night, I realized distance isn't always about space. Sometimes, it's the only way people try to protect what they already can't forget. Weeks passed, quietly, like pages turning without sound. Whatever had existed between us, that delicate, unnamed thing, had folded itself into memory. Or at least, that's what I told myself. One evening, her message arrived. Just a few simple words: "If you're free, stop by." I made too much tea. I read it twice before answering. And even then, I didn't say yes. I just found myself walking to her house, the same path I'd taken so many times before, the same one that now felt both familiar and foreign. When she opened the door, something was different. The tension that used to hover between us was gone, not erased, just softened, like the echo of a song that had already played its last note. "You came," she said quietly. "You knew I would," I replied. She smiled, a real, unguarded one this time. "Come in." The kettle's still warm. The house felt calmer than I remembered. The evening light poured in from the windows, painting everything in shades of amber. There was no music, no noise, just the quiet rhythm of her movements as she poured tea into 2 small cups. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had begun. For a while, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, like 2 people sitting inside a shared understanding, one that no longer needed words or explanations. She asked how I'd been. I told her about work, about small, meaningless things. She listened, her eyes soft, her attention steady, the same way it always had been. Then she said, "You seem quieter now." "Maybe I learned it from you," I said, smiling faintly. She looked down at her cup, tracing the rim with her fingertip. "I've missed our talks," she admitted. "Even when they made me uneasy. I didn't expect that." "Me too," I said. The uneasiness was the honest part. Her eyes lifted to mine then, steady, warm, but touched by something almost like sadness. "You know," she began slowly, "some things happen for a reason, even if the reason isn't meant to last." I nodded. "And some things stay, even when they don't continue." Her smile deepened, not bright, but knowing. She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. Then, after a heartbeat of hesitation, she closed the distance. Her fingers rested on my hand, a soft, steady touch, nothing more. It didn't feel like temptation this time. It felt like closure, a thank you, a quiet goodbye spoken without sound. After a while, she rose to clear the cups. I stood too, reluctant but calm. At the door, she turned to me, eyes glistening with warmth. "You were good to me," she said softly. "You reminded me I could still feel something gentle." Before I could respond, she reached up and cupped my face, a brief, tender gesture, her thumb brushing once against my cheek. Maternal, yet not quite. It was the kind of touch that carries every emotion words can't carry: gratitude, care, ache, and peace all at once. I didn't move. Just closed my eyes and let the moment settle. When she pulled her hand away, she whispered, "Take care of yourself." I nodded, stepped back, and turned toward the fading light. As I walked down the familiar path, I could still feel her touch, not as a weight, but as something quietly resting in my chest. Some stories don't end where they break. They end where both hearts finally learn to breathe again. And that's what this one became, a memory, soft and complete, needing no words to make it real. And if this story stayed with you, even for a moment, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. There are more stories waiting, ones that begin in silence and end where love learns to let go. Dizzy.